All right, so welcome to the last in our series of cybersecurity AI lunches, sponsored by the Belfer Center. I know there's a lot going on today, this week. There's like 3 lunches right here alone, so we appreciate you choosing us for your midday lecture. I'm really happy to introduce Mikko Hypponen, who's coming to us from Helsinki. I'm trying to remember when we met. I can't even be, I've known him for a long time. My guess is when you were in grad school, is when we met, which would
probably
be,
yes.
What years? You don't even remember when you were in grad school. All right, so we've known each other for a long time. Yeah. Primarily as a technologist, but also as someone who runs business in cybersecurity. And I heard a version of this talk at the RSA conference, which was in March or April of this year, and I wanted to bring him in to HKS so he can talk to us about basically the past, present, and future of corporate ransomware. So I know this is an exciting talk, so I'll give it to you.
Thank you, Bruce, and thanks to all of you for joining us today. Greetings from Helsinki, Finland, indeed. My name is Mikko, and I've been working with cybersecurity basically all my life. Started as a teenage programmer, published my first commercial programs as a 17-year-old in the 1980s. And then in 1991, I joined a small Helsinki-based startup, which was doing malware analysis and reverse engineering, which meant that I started going through malware samples in the early 1990s. Back then when malware looked something like this. I was reverse engineering malware and trying to figure out who wrote them, where were they coming from, and what exactly were they doing. A big part of the early malware I worked with in 1991, 1992, when I was 21, 22 years old, was coming from Russia. That's the big neighbor for Finland. I live 2 hours away from the Russian border. Both my grandfathers fought the Russians in the Second World War. So we have a big neighbor, which has also been very visible in the online world with the different attacks. So for example, that's the crash virus we found from St. Petersburg in 1992. That's Phantom 1 from 1993, written somewhere in Moscow. And when I started my professional career with cybersecurity at this time, there weren't too many malware samples or virus samples in existence. This is MS-DOS time. People weren't running Windows yet. So I collected all malware samples, which is something you cannot do anymore. At the time in 1991, you could. I had a collection of floppies, all infected with a different virus, around 150 of them. And to teach myself about the area that I was now working with, I went and reverse engineered and analyzed every single one of them. So I analyzed every virus in existence around 1992. And one of the viruses I analyzed during that time was this AIDS information Trojan from 1989. And this is a complete outlier in malware history in many ways. The very first PC virus was called Brain. Brain is from 1986. This is 3 years later. And this is ransomware. Ransomware from the 1980s, not from 1990s, from 1980s. This is before, way before I started in this field. And since at the time, computer networks like we think about them today didn't really exist, it was only spread on floppies. And it wasn't actually even a virus, it was actually mailed in the mail to people who had participated in an HIV conference. It claimed to be a program which will teach you about HIV and AIDS, which was the big news at the time in late 1980s. In reality, it was a Trojan. It expected you to pay a license fee for using this educational program. If you didn't pay, after 70 reboots, it encrypted your hard drive and showed you a ransom note asking you to wire money as a wire transfer to Panama, of all places. Now, it took quite a while until we started finding ransomware again, but this is really where history of ransomware starts from. Modern ransomware didn't really become a thing until somewhere in the mid-2000s. Started finding examples of ransomware like GP Code and Reveton. And these were mostly cases where your computer would get infected, your Windows computer would get infected with a piece of malware, And the malware would claim that your computer has been locked because you've done something bad. Typically, we call these police Trojans. So you would get a lockup screen claiming that you have illegal copies on your hard drive, and the copyright agency or the law enforcement agency has locked your system, and now you have to pay a fine. This is a ransomware, but it's a little bit different from the kind of ransomware we see today. And most importantly, the fine was not paid with cryptocurrencies. The fines were paid with virtual credit cards or other payment mechanisms like wire transfers, which were fairly easy to follow. And this is the reason why ransomware didn't become a huge problem until we found CryptoLocker. And this is 2013. CryptoLocker will remain in history books as the very first ransomware which was using Bitcoin for the payment mechanism. And this changed everything. Bitcoin, invented around 2008, 2009, had become big enough that normal consumers could actually buy Bitcoin and pay a ransom in Bitcoin. And the very first ransom Trojan to offer Bitcoin as a payment mechanism was CryptoLocker. The important difference from CryptoLocker to modern ransomware that we find today is who was being targeted. Because CryptoLocker was targeting home users. It wasn't hitting companies at all. It was hitting home users, infecting their home Windows computer, encrypting your holiday photos, and then asking for $200 to get your images back. That's basically what it was doing. And today, all ransomware is targeting companies, enterprises, organizations. No ransomware at the moment is targeting home users at all. And the reason is pretty obvious. You can ask for much, much larger payments by hitting bigger targets. But of course, it's also much harder to breach the security of large organizations. Infecting home computers is easy, but you can only collect a couple of $100 from each victim. This became a thing. We started quickly seeing new versions of CryptoLocker and then quickly competitors. This is CTP Locker a year later. This is ZeroLocker, also from 2014. And we also started to see real innovation coming from these criminal groups that were behind these ransomware attacks. My favorite example on the innovation we were seeing from these early ransomware attacks is with the popcorn Trojan. This is still targeting consumers. It's not hitting enterprises or companies. Once it infects your system, it asks you to pay 1 Bitcoin as a ransom. And at the time, 1 Bitcoin was around $350. So you have to pay $350 to unlock your home computer, which has been hit by ransomware. However, it does give you an option. If you need to get your files back, but you don't have the money, if you don't have $350 to pay, it can unlock your files if you infect 2 of your friends. And this is brilliant. This is basically combining a chain letter with a ransom note. And we actually tested this actually works. It gives you a unique URL. You share this URL, like you post it on Twitter or Facebook, and when people click on the URL, they get infected. And now if 2 of the victims you infected pay the ransom, it will unlock your files for free. So it actually does work. That's the mechanism behind it. And it is sort of like a chain letter combined with a ransomware. 1 user infects 2 users, who infect 2 users, who infect 2 more users. It goes exponential, at least in theory. So it's a good example of the kind of tricks we were seeing early on as Bitcoin-enabled ransomware started to become a thing. But the real change started only happening when we saw what I call today the age of cybercrime unicorns. And these are the largest cybercrime gangs in the world today. And all of them make their money with ransomware today. And they're not targeting home users, they're targeting the largest organizations on the planet, both private sector and public sector. And the unicorn reference here, of course, is a reference to unicorn startups. Typical definition of a unicorn startup is that it's a private company, typically technology company valued at $1 billion. And when you look at these crime gangs, Akira, Lockbit, Quantum, RansomX, Black Pasta, you look at their revenue, you look at their growth rate, you look at the wealth they control, you look at the numbers. If a startup would have these numbers, we would definitely consider them to be unicorns. Of course, these crime gangs will never do an IPO. They're not real unicorns, but that's a good way of thinking about how big and how wealthy they've become. And if organized crime gangs are scary, what's even more scary is wealthy organized crime gangs. And they've become wealthy for basically two reasons. Reason number one is that they've been collecting more and more payments every year. Roughly, the payments for ransomware attacks have roughly doubled every year for the last 5 years. But then there's the other part, which is that they've been collecting these ransoms in cryptocurrencies, mostly Bitcoin, but also in Monero for years and years. And they've been sitting on these cryptocurrencies. We know because we track their cryptocurrency wallets. When Bitcoin value or cryptocurrency values skyrocket, normal people, intelligent people sell their Bitcoins. Criminals don't. They know their wealth is safe as long as it's in cryptocurrencies. There's two kinds of currencies in the world, currencies based on politics and currencies based on math. Criminals prefer currencies based on math because they know that their wealth is safe as long as it's there. And as an end result, some of these gangs have been sitting on top of tens of thousands of Bitcoins for years, while the Bitcoin value has grown from $2,000 to $72,000. And end result is that they can now seriously invest into their attacks. And while we are speaking about Bitcoin, I always travel with a physical Bitcoin. So if you've never seen a physical Bitcoin, I'm going to put this around the audience if you feel like taking a photo, but I do want it back, Bruce. It's a real physical Bitcoin, which is unloaded. There's, if I actually lose it, I'm not going to lose a real Bitcoin. But the mechanism these work is that there's a hologram sticker on the back of the coin. If you open the sticker, and please don't, but if you would open the sticker, there would be a private key underneath the sticker. And when you open the sticker, the hologram breaks. So there's a tamper-evident hologram there, so you can know that it's been opened. The point of physical Bitcoins is that if you want to invest in Bitcoin, but don't feel safe about having them on your computer because they might get hacked or something, you can buy physical Bitcoins and put them in a safe, like gold. And if they're physically safe, then they are safe. That's the whole logic for these. But this fact, the fact that these criminal gangs have been sitting on these cryptocurrencies for years is the main explanation why they've become so wealthy. And with this wealth, they operate like organized crime gangs too. They have organizations, they have leaders, they have physical offices, they pay salaries for their employees. They have HR teams, which are recruiting new criminals to join the gangs. They have lawyers, they have business analysts. And that's the problem that we face today. And when I say them, I mean them, gangs like these. The biggest groups operating right now are pretty much listed on this screen. Not all of them are Russian, but big part of them are Russian. We have the isolated gangs from Vietnam, some operations we've seen from Japan, from Africa, but by and large it's the ex-Soviet states where these attacks, where they're coming from. We actually tried tracking these gangs and the relationships between the malware they deploy, but quickly we realized that we can't keep tracking them. This chart goes all the way until 2018, and then it just gets too complicated. I can't even fit it on a single slide anymore. But one thing which is fascinating about these crime gangs is that they do branding. They all have names. They run websites. They have names. They have logos. They have a brand, and they're actively building a brand. And this has everything to do with the double extortion mechanism that they use nowadays. Early on, ransomware would only lock your files. You pay the ransom and it will give you an unlocker program or a key for the program already on your computer, which will restore your files. Victims started paying attention to this. And as an end result, we have much, much better backups in large enterprises today than we did a decade ago. Companies realize that they not only have to take backups of everything, they also have to test that they can restore the backups, and everything is restored, and it happens quickly enough, so it actually makes sense. For example, we saw some cases where companies were hit with ransomware, and they had backups of everything, but then they realized that the restore process would take 3 weeks. Too slow. So they ended up paying the ransom just to get the files back faster. Nevertheless, today backup processes in large companies are in much better shape, and as an end result, these largest ransomware gangs migrated to double extortion tactics around 4 years ago, which means not only are your files encrypted, but they also have stolen your email archives and document archives. And if you don't pay the ransom, they will publish your documents. So there's 2 reasons for you to pay the ransom. And for this reason, they need a brand. They need a brand which is well known and scary. And if the idea of a crime gang building a brand sounds strange, it shouldn't, because real world crime gangs have been building brands for years. Hells Angels is a very well-known brand, or Bandidos, or MS-13, or Yakuzas, or the Triads. These are well-known and scary brands. And that's exactly what ransomware groups are trying to build. Especially the people who work in IT know these gangs by reputation. And you can sort of imagine that you work in IT and you come to the office Monday morning only to realize that, oh my God, we've been hit by ransomware. And then, oh my God, it's Lockbit. Oh my God, it's Akira. Because you know these gangs by name. You know them by reputation. You know that they've been around for years. You know that they know what they're doing. You know that the encryption they use is strong and well implemented. You know that you won't be able to crack the encryption, but you also know that you can do business with these guys. You know that the previous victims who've been hit by the same group who paid did get their files back, and the files were not leaked, and that the gang did not attack them again, because that's one of the promises. You pay us and we won't come back again. And they actually keep their promises. They do recover your files. They don't leak your files if you pay, and they will not attack you again. They need a reputation of being criminals, but honest criminals. Most of the victims speak to earlier victims. But do you have any advice? We were hit by the same gang that you were hit with based on public reports 6 months ago. What happened? And the previous victims will tell the story about how all their files, all their servers, all their data centers, all their laptops were encrypted. All their files were being threatened to be leaked, but then they paid the ransom and nothing was leaked. They got the files back. Then they might tell that, you know, we had a server which was corrupted. We couldn't get the files back. But then the tech support team of the criminals helped our guys and we recovered all the files. 5 out of 5 would recommend. That's the kind of reputation they're building. Criminals, but honest criminals, because they know that if they have a reputation that you can trust these guys, or that paying wouldn't work, then very quickly nobody would pay. Also, a good example on how this branding is in a way similar to real world crime gangs is that people actually take tattoos of these cybercrime gangs. That's Lockbit tattoos right there. People take Hells Angels tattoos. Well, some people take Lockbit tattoos as well. And the biggest hit, this reputation that these gangs were building for years and years, that they've ever taken, happened in 2017. Because in 2017, in May, we found WannaCry. WannaCry, which some of you will remember from 7 years ago, went around the world in a couple of hours using an exploit called Eternal Blue, which was actually stolen from the NSA. And then used by the attacker to create a piece of ransomware which went around the world, and it...
Now back to the major cyber attack, the ransomware crippling 200,000 computers in 150 countries.
And it went into 150 countries in a matter of hours. The way people found out they were hit was that they were seeing these kind of displays, not only on their computers, but, you know, on, let's say, a gas station pump getting hit by WannaCry. That was May. In June, we found NotPetya. Again, a piece of ransomware which was locking computers around the world.
It is known as the Petya virus, and it has impacted numerous businesses in Europe, including banks, energy companies, telecom operators, retailers, even government agencies. Maersk, the largest shipping container line, reported on Twitter that its computer systems are down.
And the thing that made WannaCry and NotPetya different was that they were not written by crime gangs. They were written by governments. WannaCry was written by North Korea. NotPetya was written by the Russian government, in particular the GRU, that's the military intelligence of Russian army. With WannaCry, North Korea actually tried making money, which sounds nuts, but North Korea is not a normal government. It's the only government in the world which has over and over again used cyber attacks to try to fix their budget deficit, typically with cryptocurrency-related attacks, because they're under the heaviest sanctions in the world, and you cannot sanction cryptocurrencies, so that's why they like them. And NotPetya was written by the Russian government as a cyber weapon to hit one country and one country alone. That's Ukraine, because Russia has been attacking Ukraine for over a decade right now. This attack, originally targeting only Ukraine, escaped Ukraine and hit targets around the world, like Maersk, which is actually a Danish company with 49 harbor piers around the world, handling something like 30% of the world logistics at any given moment. The reason why it escaped Ukraine and hit targets in the West was that it was a piece of malware. It was spreading automatically. It was using vulnerabilities. So companies which had offices around the world, including Ukraine, like Maersk, got hit with their Ukraine office, and then through their internal networks, it went to outside of Ukraine. But both of these cases were cases where paying the ransom didn't help. WannaCry payment mechanism, North Korea was trying to collect money, but they didn't have a Tor site or a communication mechanism for the victims. They simply had an email address. Mail us here to pay the ransom. And the email was registered from a third-party registration system, which shut down the email address on the first day of the outbreak, after which the victims couldn't communicate with the attackers and couldn't pay. NotPetya looked like ransomware, but it actually wasn't. It was just a cover story. In reality, it was a cyber weapon, which looked like ransomware as to throw the attention to the wrong places, but it was written by the Russian government. Then we saw other kinds of developments from the organized crime gangs. Most importantly, ransomware as a service, where the idea is that if you'd like to get a piece of the pie, but you don't have the know-how on how to write ransomware or how to negotiate the payments or how to move the bitcoins, you can outsource all of that and join a gang simply by having access to computers. If you're able to break into a network, you can sign up as an affiliate for a ransomware as a service group and just use these existing ransomware to infect computers, and you'll get cut off the payments. Today, all the large gangs operate like this. They have affiliates, initial access brokers, as they call them, who break into networks and then use existing ransomware, which they deploy on the systems, and they get cut off the payments. And another major innovation at the time was the leak side, which we spoke about already, double extortion. In addition of encrypting your files, they also threaten to leak your files. And fairly large amount of the victims at the companies which get hit by these attacks start negotiations. Lockbit, one of the largest gangs in the world, they've had around 5,500 victims. And thank you, I knew I could trust you guys. Out of the 5,500 companies which have been hit by Lockbit, over 2,000 have started negotiations with the criminals. Some of these chats are actually publicly accessible. You can, if you know how, you can follow how the victims are haggling and negotiating with the ransomware gangs. And one interesting thing you'll find out from these chats is that quite often the attackers have first figured out the victim and their finances. So among the files they steal from the victims are bookkeeping files, and they have their own business analysts. The criminals have business analysts which go through the books to come up with a number. And the number is, how much can this company pay us tomorrow? How much cash do they have? How many short-term loans? How many publicly traded stocks do they own? What's the figure that they can pay us tomorrow? Which completely changes the negotiation between the victim and the attackers, because now the attackers know how much money you actually have because they have your files. Another thing we started seeing at the time was that these gangs started recruiting more professionally. This is a company from Switzerland called Bastion Secure, which does penetration testing. This is them hiring pen test analysts. And this is all fake. This company doesn't exist. In reality, this is a Russian crime gang called Fin7. They were running a front end to hire white hat hackers to work for them. You join this company, you get a fully remote position for doing penetration testing against clients who have ordered a pen test. You spend a week or two finding a way in, you write the report, and you submit the report, you get paid. The only problem is that the company hasn't ordered a pen test. And once this gang has figured out a way in, thanks to you, they use your report to actually attack them for real. 4 years ago, we saw the largest ransomware attacks against critical infrastructure here in the USA. These are attacks against Colonial Pipeline and JBS Foods. JBS Foods is the largest meat processor company in the world. This was enough to wake up decision makers at the highest levels.
I talked about the proposition that certain critical infrastructure should be off limits to attack, period, by cyber or any other means. I gave them a list. If I'm not mistaken, I don't have it in front of me, 16 specific entities, 16 defined as critical infrastructure under US policy, from the energy sector to our water systems. Of course, the principle is one thing. It has to be backed up by practice. Responsible countries need to take action against criminals who conduct ransomware activities on their territory.
This is from the press conference that President Biden held after having a meeting with President Putin of Russia, negotiating how Russia is harboring these gangs and how responsible countries should take action against criminals conducting ransomware operations on their soil. And around this time, the US State Department, together with law enforcement agencies here in USA, started offering bounties for the biggest leaders in the biggest ransomware gangs. REvil, headed by Mr. Turashev and Mr. Yakubets, were put on the bounty list. This is the leader of Lockbit, Mr. Koroshev, who actually lives in the city of Voronezh, right on the Ukrainian border. I actually have the wanted poster on my laptop myself, just to remind myself what the guy looks like. This is Mr. Matveev, also part of the Lockbit gang. But none of these guys have been caught because they don't leave Russia after they've been put on these wanted lists. In fact, Mr. Matveev, who's also known as Mr. Four Fingers because he only has 4 fingers in one of his hands, when he saw that he was posted on these wanted lists, he actually posted this on his Twitter. He says, cuckoo, and then posts a picture of his room, including a t-shirt he had made, which has the poster right there. And the interesting thing about these bounties is that they actually work. So they have worked successfully multiple times. The US State Department has been running reward for justice program for quite a while, typically for paying bounties for information leading to the arrests of terrorists like Al-Qaeda or ISIS leaders. And the typical bounty has been the same bounty, $10 million. So they're offering the same amount of bounties for ransomware gang leaders as they are offering for terrorist gang leaders, which is an interesting comparison. That's how seriously US government is taking this problem. But there's another thing. It's not publicly advertised, but it's well understood that the Reward for Justice program also provides immunity from prosecution for the people who come forward. And this changes, it becomes a game theory problem right after this. You can imagine that you're a member of this gang. You belong to one of these gangs. You read the news. US government is offering $10 million if I rat my friends. If I rat my friends, all my friends will go to jail, but I won't. I'm going to get immunity from prosecution and I'm going to get $10 million. And then you realize that all your friends are reading the news as well. So the first mover gets everything, everyone else loses everything. And this is clever, and it has worked. We have multiple cases, including in hard-to-reach countries where local law enforcement has worked on tips coming from the Reward for Justice program to arrest ransomware gang leaders. In this clip where law enforcement is entering a house run by one of the Conti ransomware gang leaders, they were actually entering the facilities carrying a master key. I don't know if you spotted the master key from the clip. It looks like this. That's the master key, and this is how you use it to get inside.
What country is that?
That was Ukraine. Ukraine has had a sizable amount of ransomware gangs, especially in history. Over the last 2.5 years, as the active war has been going on, we've seen a clear drop in the amount of ransomware operations in Ukraine, pretty understandably, because a big part of the people are fighting war. Now, these operations are great, and I would actually claim that that's the most important thing that we should be doing, trying to better catch the individuals running these ransomware operations, or in general, catching online criminals, because right now that's where we are failing the hardest. And it's not just that these people stay online and continue their criminal activity, it's also the fact that they show an example. There's a lot of young people in one way or another developing countries who have the technical skills, but who don't have the opportunities. If you know how to program, but you can't get a job, and then you see these guys driving around in Rolls Royces, it's no wonder that some people choose to go to the wrong side of the law, especially when they know that nobody's getting caught, and even the ones who are getting caught are not going to court. And even if they go to court, they're not getting sentences. And even if they get sentences, the sentences aren't nearly what you would get from real world crime. So the more we catch these guys, the better it is. And I often speak with leadership teams or board members of companies, and I tell them about these problems. I tell them about ransomware. And I've yet to meet a company where the leaders would sort of assume that, they're probably going to hit us next. They always assume that, they're going to hit someone else. Why would they hit us? Especially for small or mid-sized companies, they often think that, we're not very visible. How would they even find us? How would they even know about us? Why would they choose us? And what I always tell them is that they don't really choose you. And I go to a website like this. That's the Lockbit leak site. All these are companies hit by Lockbit. And I just show other victims. These are companies which have been hit this month. And then they realize that the list never ends. There's hundreds and hundreds of companies and public sector entities from all over the world, of all business areas, of all sizes. It literally is that you have right next to each other a furniture manufacturing company from Denmark, then you have a bank from Vancouver, then you have a steel mill from Sao Paulo, Brazil. It's like somebody would have shot at the internet with a shotgun, hitting random targets. That's what it looks like. And the reason why it looks so random is that these gangs don't start from a victim. They start from a vulnerability. They have a way in. There's this RDP or VPN server system, which has this vulnerability. Let's scan the whole internet to find all the vulnerable servers. You can scan the IPv4 address space in 5 hours. You end up with a list of, 1,000 servers. And then they start going through the list. And you end up with something like this, a random collection of entities on the internet. And this typically opens the eyes of the decision makers in companies. They realize that, if these companies were hit, we can be hit. There's nothing really protecting you. And when we look at what's been happening this year, here in the United States, we've had pretty big cases. Maybe the biggest, the United Health breach. Every third of you was affected by this. Because around 100 million victims were part of the United Health incident. There's 350 million Americans, so something like that. Big part of us in the room were affected by this ransomware, which was by the Alpha ransomware gang, which is like the 4th largest gang right now. Interestingly enough, here paying the ransom didn't work because the affiliate that did the actual breach didn't get the payment. One of the Alpha gang leaders did what we call an exit scam. He took the money and ran. No one else knew his identity. And end result was that the actual hacker who did the hack then ended up selling the data to get some money out of it. I mean, he successfully already breached it. They got the payment. He didn't get the money, so he resold the data. United Health paid 22 million and they get nothing in exchange. So sometimes these don't work. There's a long post on the Alpha Tor site explaining what actually went down here. The other large case here in the USA we've seen this year was the black suit breach. Black Suit is one of the smaller ransomware gangs, but earlier this year they hit a company called CDK, which provides software for a very large part of car dealerships in the United States for different car brands like Jeep or Nissan or Lexus and what have you. Many car dealerships earlier this year had major issues with this. But the logic that we see in these attacks keeps repeating itself. Attackers gain access, typically through a vulnerability by scanning the whole internet to find all vulnerable machines. They find their way in, they do lateral movement to gain access to everything, all data centers, all laptops, all servers, or cloud instances. Then they do the actual exfiltration of data. When they've downloaded everything, they attack. And this is typically done Sunday, Monday night, hoping that they have a little bit of time to encrypt everything before someone realizes what's happening. So what's going to be then the future? Well, it's going to get worse. I'd love to be able to tell you good news, but it doesn't look like it. It's not getting better. It's getting worse. We've seen the first decade of corporate ransomware, corporate Bitcoin-enabled ransomware attacks. It's been getting bigger and bigger for the last 10 years. We will see another decade, at least, is my guess. There will be more groups. This works. The money is great. These groups have shown that they can stay around for years. They can invest in their attacks, and they will make more money out of their attacks after investing into it. And we do believe that AI will start to play a part in this as well. We haven't seen this yet, but we will. So what can we expect from generative AI and ransomware? One thing will be complete automation of these attacks. Right now, these attacks are run by humans at human speed. And what I mean by that is that when they launch their attacks, when we detect their attacks, we block their servers, we block their payment mechanisms, we block the domains they use. If they use emails to spread the malware, we blacklist the emails. And it takes them a while to realize we've done this, hours, even days. And then they go and register a new domain name or change the IP addresses to a new range. They're working at human speed. They could work at machine speed. This could all be automated with fairly simple systems, which would detect automatically what we're doing and then respond in seconds. We are responding very fast to attacks because we've automated everything. They could do the same, but they haven't. And they could. They will. This is going to happen in the near future. And then the other thing which we will see in the future as well is that when they scan for these vulnerabilities from the whole internet to find more victims, they will, in the future, they will be scanning for vulnerabilities which will be discovered by artificial intelligence. This isn't very far away. You could sort of imagine that already today, you could take the source code of a program and show it to a large language model. Find me all the bugs. Find me all the bugs from this program. Then write an exploit to exploit the bugs. It's almost doable today. Then you could skip the source code part and just give it the binary. Here's an exe, reverse engineer the exe, find all the bugs. Find all the bugs and exploit them. It's going to be the beginning of the next decade of ransomware. Thank you. So we go to questions, and after we've done the questions, the best question from the room gets a copy of my latest book. So try hard.
Hello, my name is Gabrielle Coleman. I'm a professor of anthropology that works on computer hackers. Thank you so much for that incredible talk. I just have a quick clarification question and then I guess a more substantial one. So I work a little bit on the history of hacking and leaking of a very particular types with email leaks. And I just wanted clarification as to whether the first sort of ransomware hack and leak was Maze. So that's the clarification. And then I'm wondering if companies are changing the way that they do internal communications as a way to mitigate this problem. Insofar as, are they using sort of offline means or other mechanisms because they know that their data has the possibility to be leaked either by hacktivists or ransomware groups?
Yeah, great. And yes, the first ransomware gang to have a dedicated leak site was indeed Maze. So that's based on what we've tracked over these years. And the copycats happened immediately. All the major groups started doing the same thing very quickly after that, because it's a great idea. But Maze was the one that discovered the idea. Now, the idea that corporate communications, like the people inside organizations would communicate differently, knowing that it's possible that their communication could become public. Ransomware is one way it could become public. Of course, lawsuits is another one. So I think some companies might already be thinking about that, and probably are thinking about this and using different means of communication, like face-to-face discussion, when they're doing something shady. So it's probably happening already. I think it's pretty obvious it's happening, and it makes sense. If you're doing something shady, don't put it on the record. Another thing which is also important to mention here is that companies find it surprisingly hard to communicate when the attack is underway. Maersk, the logistics company, was mentioned here. I know Andy, who was the CISO at Maersk at the time when it happened, and one of the stories he tells was that how hard it was to figure out how large the problem was, because they had no visibility. All their systems had been encrypted. They couldn't communicate. There was no Teams, no Slack, no nothing. Even worse, they were wondering what's the state of the harbors in Japan. And since they had no email and they had no Teams, they tried to call Japan, only to realize that the phone books in all of their phones was empty because their AD servers had been wiped. AD was linked to mobile phone books. They didn't have the numbers. And then they were like scrambling, like, hey, does anybody have the number for the Japan office? And of course, nobody has it. They really had to like dig it up from somewhere, which is a great example of how to think ahead. This is the reason why companies do tabletop exercises where they can like safely rehearse this, that, hey, you don't have access to your phone books. You need to call Japan. How do you do it? So it requires thinking beforehand.
It's amazing how many companies forget if you're doing something shady, don't do it on email. That is advice. We give good advice here.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I was just wondering, isn't it more likely to become a target for investigation if they expose themselves by using their image and brand and like openly recruiting the staff, like HR members even? And also, my other question is, if you were a victim and if you find the ransomware gang outside your country, and the country you're living in and the country the gang is based on happen to have a extradition treaty between them, is it also possible for the victim's government to request the country where the gang is based on to like send the criminals to that area?
I'll answer the second question first. Yes, this has happened, and there's been extradition of ransomware gang leaders from countries which do extradite. Typically, the extraditions have been to the United States. There's been gang leaders, for example, from Greece and Poland and Czech Republic, which have been extradited for trial to USAs. Many of them Russian, who've been having holidays in these places, of all places, without realizing that they can be arrested and extradited for doing that. Then the question about the big brand, whether it's riskier for these gangs to have this big visibility and make it more likely that they're being investigated, they don't seem to care. They think the upside is bigger than the downside. They are pretty brazen about these attacks. I mean, just the fact that this guy was printing T-shirts of his bounty posters is a good example of that. Maybe even better example is that I know of several cases where ransomware gangs have attacked law enforcement agencies with their attacks. For example, Washington, D.C. Law enforcement agency was attacked with ransomware gang. And I know of 2 cases where the ransom was paid. So these are cases where cops pay the criminals to get their own files back, which is pretty wild. So I don't think they care about the brand, that it would make them more visible. They do seem to think they're untouchable in some way or another.
Hi, that was really a good talk. I wish I had a very smart question to get a copy of a book, but I don't. It's a very off the beat, run-of-the-mill question. This thing which is being reported about JP Morgan glitch, which has caused a lot of loss to many people in terms of losing their money? Is it one of this kind of ransomware thing, or is it something specifically because there was some fault in JP Morgan itself?
There's been multiple cases involving JP Morgan, and so I'm not sure which one do you refer to. However, none of the cases I know of has been a ransomware incident. So of course, we have to remember, we've been only speaking about ransomware here. It is the biggest single problem, but far from the only problem. The other big cases where a lot of money is being made are typically then BEC scams or CEO scams, which are quickly becoming now AI enabled as well with deepfakes. And the other big moneymaker for crime gangs are denial of service attacks, typically targeting online stores and web shops, shutting them down, and then you have to pay a payment to stop the attacks. But this is the biggest problem.
What do you know about the relationship of these organizations to the Russian government? There presumably is a quite considerable spectrum. And as you said, not Petya, you had the GRU masquerading as ransomware. But at the other end of the scale, there would be companies such as the type you mentioned, which have no connection to the government. But to what extent does the government, in the middle ranges, to what extent does the government stimulate and use them? For example, after Biden and Putin met in Geneva in 2021, and Biden raised this issue, subsequently, the Russians arrested a number of ransomware chieftains, or whatever we'll call them. Then after the Ukraine dispute or invasion, the Russians no longer cooperate. So what do you know about the relation between the Russian government and these entities that you described?
Sure. So if we actually go back to my slide, we had listing of names of different ransomware gangs. Most of these are Russian. None of them are directly linked to the Russian government, to our knowledge. NotPetya, which was written by GRU, wasn't ransomware. It just looked like ransomware. We don't have any intelligence or any information which would have direct links with these ransomware gangs and the Russian government. However, they seem to be protected indirectly by the Russian government. Russian government doesn't care. They don't stop these gangs except in extraordinary cases like the one you mentioned. And there seems to be some kind of silent agreement that these ransomware gangs operating from Russia don't hit Russian companies. They don't hit Russian victims. And that's not patriotism. That's simply avoiding the local law enforcement. If all the victims are in faraway countries, typically in countries which are seen as the enemy of Russia, local law enforcement doesn't care. Why would they care? Some of these gangs, I mean, there are examples of this working the other way around. Some of these gangs support the Russian government. Most importantly, the announcement from the Conti gang, which was the biggest gang at the time, 2.5 years ago, when Russian invasion of Ukraine started. Day one of the war, Conti announced on their website, on their Tor site, that they're supporting Russian government in the war, and they will use all of their tools and knowledge to hit the targets of the enemy of their home country, Russia. And they were hitting for a lot of energy sector targets, for example, in Europe, right after that. So they clearly are patriotic hackers among these gangs, but it isn't as clear that Russian government would directly be funding or supporting these gangs by themselves. They are criminal gangs which Russian law enforcement doesn't care too much about. If there's something deeper going on, we don't have evidence of that. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. I have a couple of questions and I request your inputs on them. The first one is when the vulnerability of the software applications came up, the concept of ethical hacking came up in a big way. So what is the ethical aspect? Are there a group of developers who work on an equivalent platform to protect, against these sort of vulnerabilities? The second one is talking about big corporates who face this vulnerability. Is there any commercial consulting or a solution which helps us in protecting ourselves against this by hiring some sort of specific solution provider who helps in working out solutions or applications which protects the financial investment of the firm. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, as long as we have humans writing the code that we run, humans will always make mistakes. When programmers make mistakes, they end up with bugs. And when we have bugs in online systems, they easily become vulnerabilities. The solution to this is obvious: get rid of humans. When most of the code we run is written by machines, we will have, hopefully, less bugs, which means less vulnerabilities, but it isn't exactly the solution we like either, is it? But the end game is very simple. As long as we have bugs, we have vulnerabilities, and they can be exploited by these attackers. So we really should be doing better software development one way or another to minimize the amount of vulnerabilities and make it harder to discover these vulnerabilities. Then regarding the financial angle of these attacks, like I said, cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin are based on math, which means the only solutions that we have available to us are technical solutions, because regulation and laws don't matter. They don't work. And what I mean by this is that when we think about traditional finance, we can pass laws and regulations and they work because currencies like dollars and euros are based on politics. But Bitcoin and Monero and Zcash are based on math. And math doesn't care about your laws. Math ignores your laws. You can pass a law which says that the value of pi is not 3.14, but 4.14. And you could pass a law like that, it would change nothing. Pi would still be 3.14. The same thing applies to cryptocurrencies. They're based on math. Math ignores your laws and regulations. The only thing you can regulate is the interaction between real world currencies and online currencies. You can regulate that, but anything happening on chain and inside these systems, it doesn't matter. And that's why these gangs keep their wealth inside blockchain. Now, Bitcoin in particular is far from anonymous. It's based on a public ledger. You can follow every single transaction, which makes it actually possible that we can follow the money movements in there. But of course, they know it. And whenever they want to use their money, they go through different laundering system, which typically involves moving Bitcoin into multiple other currencies, including double-blind currencies, Zcash and Monero and others, and then moving it back to Bitcoin and then to real world to try to make it impossible to track. We know of 2 cases by law enforcement so far where the untrackable currency Monero has been successfully tracked. Both happened during this year. So we have some hope of better technologies in tracking the money movements, even inside these systems that are supposed to be untrackable.
Hi, I used to work on like surveillance spyware, and these are not developed by criminal gang, but like a big corporate entities worth billions of dollars. And these kind of companies, so I work on the Pegasus spyware, and this kind of company, they claim to sell it only to the government entities, which they claim that this is to fight drugs or human trafficking, and the bad state actor would use that to hunt down political dissidents, spying on their activities online. This is political purpose, but you see that I assume that this kind of technology is more sophisticated because they have more resources. There's like zero-click exploit. Do you see this kind of technology being transferred to use for financial means like the ransomware as well?
No, I don't. Software like Pegasus from NSO is marketed to governmental customers only, which doesn't make it ethical. They've sold it to countries like Saudi Arabia and other countries which use it to hunt down dissidents. I don't like the company, I don't like the technology. However, it's a great example on how much more secure end user computing has become over the last 15 years. Pegasus is a mobile Trojan. It's not used to target your laptop, it's used to target your iPhone. Pegasus, we've seen some price lists of how much it costs governments to hit a single victim with Pegasus, and it might be $100,000. The price of hacking your iPhone is $100,000. That's not a security failure from Apple. That's a security success story. If it costs $100,000 to hack your phone, that's a pretty goddamn good phone. What's the price of hacking your Windows laptop? Well, $1. Hacking your phone is 100,000, which means you won't be, I mean, maybe some of us in the room might be targeted. Most of us will not be, we're not worth $100,000. So that's a great example on how mobile devices are much more secure than traditional computers for many reasons, which we don't have time to go into right now because we have the last question.
Thank you so much for this super interesting talk. So I know some of these hacker groups have somewhat of a Robin Hood status that they give 10% back to charity and these kind of things. And for the younger generation, something of my generation perhaps, I know they receive a bit of empathy, and some people kind of like them, especially in the maybe more underground communities, because they sometimes market themselves as taking for the rich, giving to the poor, and you're not doing crime that hurt people, but just taking money. And I think I probably know your opinion, but I'm just curious to hear your sort of opinion, if this is purely opportunistic or if there's some truth in this, and how do you place yourself in regard to this?
And don't some of them have rules? We don't attack hospitals.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
Yeah.
social responsibility
Sure.
rules.
Absolutely. Some of these
They're
gangs,
very responsible.
some of these gangs I mean, they have long policies and they give directions to their affiliates. And some of them say that don't attack law enforcement, don't attack hospitals, don't attack cancer research or things like that. During the pandemic, many of these gangs were avoiding hitting vaccine research units and things like that. Other gangs were doing exactly the opposite. And now's the time to go after hospitals. They can't afford not to pay because of this situation. So both of these are happening at the very same time. And you're right that some of these gangs, there's actually one gang which only collects the ransom, so it has to be paid to a charity, not to themselves. But these are very small outliers. They do exist, but they're so small in the big picture that we could ignore them. Vast majority of these gangs are doing exactly what I was showing to you today. They make millions and millions targeting all kinds of attackers, and there's no charity anywhere to be seen.
One more question?
Okay, that's the last question.
No, you're last one now.
So kind of going off of that vein, do you feel like because they have so much wealth that they're able to accumulate through these ransomware attacks, that the 10 million bounty is even something that's like sufficient to incentivize people to actually, like turn people in?
Some of the gang members who are not wealthy and know the identities of other members.
Plus immunity. It's not just bounty, right?
Yeah.
It's bounty plus you go legit.
Yes, yeah, and the offer of immunity from prosecution is a very important part of this. Although it's never publicly advertised anywhere in these rewards for justice programs, it's a key part of making this work at all. Some of these gangs run bounties by themselves. They run bounties to find vulnerabilities in their own systems, and some of these gang leaders are offering millions of dollars. Like, if you find my identity, tell me how you found it, and I'll pay you millions, so they can protect their OPSEC, operational security, better. So there's all kinds of bounties going around. And I think that's all we have time for.
So thank you all.
And we have a book.
You can have the book out. This is the last in this series. We'll be back in spring with more speakers, so pay attention on wherever you get your fine lunchtime speaker information. Who are you going to give the book to?
And the book goes to the young lady at the last row. Thank you very much. Please come and take it up.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you again.